Hello to everyone. My name is Rebecca Ivanoff, and I'm the Seed Program Manager at the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario. And I'm the Ontario Regional Coordinator for the BAUDA Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. And while we're not all gathered in one place today, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm here living and working in Guelph, Ontario, which is situated on the ancestral homelands of the Naughton and the Mississaugas of the Credit, with whom I'm in treaty relationship through the Between the Lakes Treaty Number 3. Through my work, I work to honor and respect the land, the water, the plants, the seeds, the animals, and past and emerging Indigenous elders. I mention this to share my intention to work towards learning more about my responsibilities to this land and to the original seed stewards. We encourage you to learn more about the history of the land you are in relationship with by visiting 2 websites, which Tiara will throw into the chat. And I just wanted to mention that I have personally learned a lot from the amazing work being done by folks at the Gindegi Sanctuary, and also a program called Revitalizing Our Sustenance Project. There are many others doing really good seed work, and I'd love to learn more and be able to uplift their work. So share links in the chat if you are able. I see that we have 38 folks joining us live today. Welcome, and welcome to those who will be listening to the recording as well. So through our work here at the BAUDA Initiative to increase the quality, quantity, and diversity of ecological seed, we've noted that the farmers that we interact with are often feeling torn between believing in the importance of biodiversity conservation and perhaps the needs of a production farm. So what we're asking today is if and how there might be room on our commercial farms to conserve biodiversity. Today's panel will share how they are choosing to save seed biodiversity in their fields and gardens by supporting regional seed companies, by growing and marketing rare veggies or grains, and by saving seed from uncommon varieties. So these wonderful panelists will tell us about some of their rationale, some of the methods they're using, and some of maybe the marketing that they use in order to conserve seed on their farms. And then we'll also hear some opportunities for us all to get involved in Seeds Diversity as many programs, and how farmers play a key role in some of those programs. So there were some questions when folks were registering around, really wanting to learn more, some specifics about seed saving. And today the conversation will be more focused on how we can bring in seed biodiversity conservation onto the farm. For those who are interested in some of those specific seed saving resources, Tara is going to put into the chat some of those that you can view afterwards. But now I'm so pleased to introduce our 4 panelists. We'll go through the bios at first. Maybe I'll go through the bio for each of you before you set up your presentations. So for our first presenter, Bob Wildfong is the Executive Director of Seeds Diversity Canada, a national not-for-profit organization for seed savers and growers who are interested in sustainable seed genetics. He lives and works in Waterloo Region, Ontario. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Becca. So I'm with this organization, Seeds of Diversity, which is a seed saving organization. And I'll start this webinar just by going through a kind of the context of what we mean by seed conservation and why we do it. Seed conservation happens at a lot of different scales, but often it's at a very small scale. When we're trying to conserve a plant variety that is very difficult to find, or we have only a few seeds, it has to happen at a small scale. There's no such thing as a large bulk quantity of a rare variety. So all of our work seems to be at a smaller scale, and that means it impacts different people in different ways, but it's often achievable on even a small area of land or with a small amount of time. When we're talking about seed security, and this term comes up all the time, I always like to say seed and food security. because people know what food security is all about. And if they know that, they can just think, okay, seed security, that's the same thing as food security, but with seeds. And when we talk about having a secure food system, we want a reliable supply of food that are the kinds of food that people want to eat. And so seed security is just the same thing, substitute the word seed in there, so it's a safe and reliable supply of seeds for producing the food that people want. And conservation is kind of the very beginning of that security, because so much of what we grow depends on being able to have the right choices, to grow the right kind of food, or the food that fits the situation, whether it's a soil or a climate or a particular cuisine. You need the right kinds of seeds to fit that. And so having lots of choices is the way that you can find the right fit. And so conserving the genetics that gives us those choices, that's what seed conservation is about. Throughout the past 100 years, but for sure, probably for the last 10,000 years, whenever there were any changes in the way people grew food or the kinds of food that people ate, they changed the kinds of seeds that they grew. And so I'll look a little bit into the past here to give a sense of what conservation really means and what diversity really means. But I always want to look at the past as a way of figuring out what the future will look like, because that's what really matters to us. And when we look at the past, we see a lot of change in the last 100 years. If you think of what people ate 100 years ago and what people grew, how they grew it, it's very different than what we do today. And every about 20 years or so, the system of how we grew things changed, and what we ate changed. And the way we adapted to those changes is we just used different seeds. So if we think if that continues, and will there be change in the next 20 years? You betcha there will be lots of change. For better or for worse, we're living in times of change. And so whatever we did 20 years ago has to be different than today. 20 years from now will be different than today, and we will adapt, I hope, in the same way by using different kinds of seeds. We need those choices. We need diversity of choices and seeds. And so we want to conserve what we have. But this is what happened over the last 100 years. If you imagine this circle with the little tomatoes in it, if that represents all the different kinds of food plants that we had 100 years ago, then this is what happened over the last 100 years. 3/4 of our plant diversity went extinct, because 100 years ago, there were a lot of sort of small-scale seed companies, small-scale seed growers. People were producing seeds in their own regions, and we moved to a mass market seed supply. And that mass market is now global. So there are fewer people producing seeds and fewer varieties, therefore. And that means we now have fewer choices. We only have 1/4 of the genetic diversity to work with than we had 100 years ago. But we have, if anything, we have more changes to adapt to. To make that worse, in a way, is the little green segment there. That's what you can actually buy. The other part of that 1/4 that remains is in seed banks, where most people can't get the seeds. There are, it feels like there are lots of seeds out there, but really there's so much more that you can't get because it's in seed banks and not accessible. And there's so much more that you could have gotten 100 years ago that's gone. And to put that into sort of a visual, here are 5 varieties that a lot of people would sort of recognize. They're pretty common, easy to find varieties of vegetables. Well, for every 5 varieties of vegetables that you can kind of find easily today, there are this many that are around, but they're hard to find. You might only find one source of them. You might not find any commercial sources of them. You might only find them in a seed bank or in a seed savers group. And for every 5 of those green varieties that are pretty easy to find today, there are this many that used to exist, but we can't find them anymore. So this is the situation where we used to have all this diversity. Now we're down to being able to easily only find those 5 green ones out of all of these. That's what we're up against. And as we lose more, and there are still varieties dying out, a lot of these yellow varieties that are hard to find, they're falling through the cracks. Our whole purpose as a seed savers organization is to identify these yellow ones and try to get more people to grow them and therefore save them so that we don't wind up with such a tiny amount of diversity to work with when we're trying to adapt to giant changes in our food system. Where is all the diversity? It's actually in a lot of those older varieties. And we don't necessarily think of heritage seed varieties as being the vast majority of all the varieties that we have. But in fact, that's true. If you think about how many new varieties come on the market every year, it's a handful, right? You can look in seed catalogs and you can talk to plant breeders and you can find some new varieties coming on the market all the time. And that's wonderful. It seems like there are lots of those. But if you count them up, and then you look at how many older varieties we still have, it turns out that probably 80 to 90% of all the varieties that now exist are actually really old ones. So when we talk about seed conservation, it sometimes feels like we're just trying to collect up all the heritage varieties. I like to maybe think of that as those are the future opportunities. Those are just varieties, right? If 80 to 90% of all the varieties that we have, all the genetics that we have, happen to be really old, it doesn't mean that they have to be in a museum. It just means that those are the varieties we have left to us, and we need to keep them, because if we don't have genetic diversity in the food system, we will have big trouble in the future. So, but like I said before, only about 12% of those are actually available in seed catalogs and easily accessible. Most of them are in seed banks, and so they're difficult for the average person to get. You've seen this picture before. This is sort of an iconic picture of a seed bank. And there are lots of people out there who think there's a seed bank somewhere up north. Isn't there that big seed bank that collects up all those seeds? That's what everybody knows. What people don't realize is that generally there are hundreds of seed banks all around the world. And this one is special because it's kind of like the backup for all of those. So this is the backup seed bank for seed banks. Okay. And all the seed banks around the world kind of use it as a depository to keep samples of their collections safe. But what it is it's this sort of metaphor for preservation, for the future, for security, for safety. And you can, if you had the chance to ever visit there, it's this really remote sort of mine shaft in the side of a mountain, way up in the Arctic Circle, on a remote island where there are more polar bears than people. But if you were to go there, you would see all these shelves with boxes, and they're full of seeds, and it seems great. But the problem with it is, how would you get those seeds? If you're a grower and you need to get some seeds to be able to, grow food, you can't even get to it. It's part of a system. It's part of a larger system that's a backup. And that larger system includes many other seed banks that are located in countries all around the world. This is a shot from the inside of the Canadian Agriculture Canada Seed Bank in Saskatoon. They have about 100,000 samples of seeds in these little envelopes. And that seems great. Okay, so we have 100,000 samples of seeds. That's lots. But the problem is, they're just little tiny envelopes. There's not enough of any one variety for you to plant much more than a little tiny row of seeds. They're not meant to be for saving the world in the short term. They're meant to be for providing a starting point if you want to grow a particular kind of seed that isn't easily available. You can get a few seeds and then you can bulk them up from there. But it would take several years to bulk them up. That's what seed banking is about. But there's a problem with that too. What if a whole bunch of people wanted a particular kind of seed from the seed bank and they only have a little envelope of it? They don't even have enough of each kind to be able to distribute them to more people. So this is where we put really our active work. Instead of looking to seed banks, we're looking to try to get more people growing seeds, having seeds in their possession on their land, and exchanging the seeds with each other. And so in Seed Savers, I would also include seed companies who are growing their own seeds. I would include community seed collections. I would include just any grower who's producing their own seeds for their own use, but also exchanging them with other people in some way, maybe for money, maybe for free. But that sort of larger community has a lot more potential for making seeds accessible to you and to me. And that's where we put most of our work as an organization. You see, because Seeds of Diversity is in some way kind of a bridge between those people and this seed banking world. If the seed bank over on the right only has a little tiny envelope of each kind of seed, that means you and I can't just buy them from that seed bank. It's not like buying a packet of seeds from a seed company. They only have one packet of seeds. So what you do instead is a person who has what is deemed to be a legitimate reason for accessing the seed bank can get a very small number of seeds. And then from there, they will bulk those up and use them for whatever their purpose is. And they tend to be pretty broad-minded about what that purpose can be. But since they don't have very much to spare, it really is not for the average person to just access seeds from a seed bank. One of the functions that Seeds of Diversity has had in the past is to access some of those seeds on behalf of growers. So I've had several people who have had an interest in a particular variety for whatever reason, and they haven't been able to get a source of that variety, but we know it's in a seed bank someplace. So Seeds of Diversity can access a small number, it's usually something like 50 or 100 seeds, and then on behalf of that grower, they can get a starting amount that they can multiply from there. So that's one of the things that Seeds of Diversity does as an organization, to make a kind of a bridge between where the seeds are in these seed banks and where they should be, which is on the land and in the hands of the people. Also, a really important thing that we do is then to exchange seeds with those people, because when we have a few seeds that are now maybe a little bit bulked up and available to a few, we want to make sure that they're accessible to as many people as possible. Our whole point is not to just lock them up in seed banks and seed collections, but to have them in use and being grown by people. So the methods that we use for doing that is, first of all, and we'll talk more about this later on, what we call a seed library. It's really a seed collection, which is a backup of the seeds that we have gotten from our seed growing members, from seed companies, sometimes seed companies that have discontinued their stock, and we'll get some of the last remaining supply from their inventories. But it's a seed collection of the varieties that we know are difficult to find from other places. I'm not so interested in collecting up seeds that are easy to get, because they're easy to get. I'm interested in collecting up seeds that are hard to get, and then making at least one more place where you could get them. We encourage our members to save seeds and exchange them with each other. And we have a seed exchange, which is currently the largest seed exchange in Canada. Last year, we had just about 2,400 different varieties of mostly vegetables, fruit, a few grains. And that is a member-to-member seed exchange. Membership is now free in Seeds of Diversity. If you aren't familiar with how our seed exchange works, check it out, because you can just sign up for free and participate in it. People exchange seeds through the mail just for the cost of postage. Basically, it's a reasonable amount of money to get this many different kinds of seeds. The purpose of it is to try to grow and distribute as many of those varieties as possible that you couldn't get someplace else. And how do we know whether you could get it someplace else? Every year, we make an index of all the seed catalogs in Canada. So it doesn't include the seed catalogs in the US, and that's a big missing piece, but there are a lot of those, so that's hard to do. At least this gives us a snapshot of the varieties that are being sold in Canada, and gives us an idea of which of those varieties are easy to find and which of them aren't. And that gives us a really good indicator of how much priority to give each of those varieties when we're collecting them and trying to distribute them. So check that out. It's available for free. It helps you to find varieties you're looking for, but it also, more importantly, helps you to figure out which varieties are those green varieties that are really easy to find and which are the yellow varieties that are hard to find. And if you're looking for something to conserve, it's the yellow varieties that need it. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the diversity that is out there, but it's not necessarily old. I don't like to focus on the past as much as I like to focus on the future and the present. And the situation that we have, I think, in the local seed varieties that are available to us. Here's an example of what I'm talking about. But we know that there are about 150 varieties of tomatoes that have been bred in Canada. And you might know some of their names, but I bet you can't think of 150 of them. And if you looked in our seed list, you would not find 150 varieties of Canadian tomatoes for sale. So here's an example of a pool of genetics that should be really useful to us in Canada, but we can't get it. We can't find these varieties. And the reason that we can't find them is that the global seed system is not interested in providing Canadian varieties, right? We're a teeny tiny part of the food system from a large seed company's point of view. And so when you go to a big seed company or a medium-sized seed company, we know that they're not growing their own seeds. They're retailing seeds that are produced internationally and through the global wholesale seed system. And that means that the varieties they offer are not tuned to Canada, because why would they? They're probably varieties that are more attuned for a part of North America that has a longer growing season, which is not Canada. So the only way we're going to have access to Canadian bred varieties, and those do exist, is if we're growing them in Canada in order to be able to try them out, grow them in different ways in a changing climate, in changing growing conditions. Maybe they haven't been tried organically, but we haven't tested them in all the different ways that we might use them today. We can't lose these. We have to preserve them so that we can try them and so that we can perhaps benefit from them in the future. I also want to end with a bit of a larger consideration about conservation, diversity, and seed security, which is that a lot of our ideas of how we choose the varieties that we grow, how we choose the seeds that we want to preserve, or that we even choose the species or crops that we grow, has to do with an old-fashioned way of thinking about excellence. We wanted throughout the 20th century to find the best potato, the best wheat, the best of everything, garlic or bean or tomato or eggplant, whatever it is, to the point where we said, okay, here's the best potato for all of Canada, and encouraged everyone to grow the same thing all across the country. Well, that seems a little bit silly, as we're in a period of much more unpredictable weather patterns and much more unpredictable climate. And as climate change increases, that kind of thinking is just not going to work anymore. We're not looking anymore for what's the best kind of potato, what's the best kind of wheat. We're looking for what is the most resilient, maybe combination of potatoes, or what is the most resilient group of wheat that might withstand a drought or a flood. Well, we don't know which. And that kind of thinking about resilience, I think, is going to be what we need in this century, more so than seeking the best, which is the thinking we had in the past century. And that's why we need to conserve what we have, because we need to evaluate what we have in a completely different lens for a completely different reason. So if you are familiar with Seeds of Diversity, then I thank you for that and for your support. And if you aren't, have a look on our website. It's really easy to find us at seeds.ca. And like I mentioned, we have a seed exchange with our membership, which is free. And you can find our backup collection of seeds and the complete index of Canadian seed catalogs that we use to understand which varieties are important to us and which are easy to find. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to Becca.
Thank you so much, Bob. That really helped put some context into the story of conservation and the importance of conservation. I'm going to share some slides here as well, but I want to say that it is really hard to get seeds out of those big seed banks. We have tried in terms of for breeding for climate change and needing those genetics, and so that role that you play as seeds diversity is so important. But next we have Michelle Smith, and I welcome you, Michelle. Michelle has been market gardening and farming in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia for over 30 years. She's been using and growing a wide variety of open pollinated heirloom seeds that she has used to develop ways to manage the challenges in her bioregion and work on her family farm. She leads many gardening and seed workshops and serves on the board of Seeds Diversity Canada, and as well as representing alternative producers with the Federation of Agriculture. So Michelle, I'll pass it over to you, and I'll just change between slides if you want to give me a nod when you'd like me to do that.
That sounds good. Well, I want to start with, I've got the story behind all that that Bob was talking about. I really appreciate the sort of introduction to seed security that he just gave. Well, the story I want to start with is in the winter of 2019 to 2020, I began a seed sharing project with the Cape Breton Regional Library, where we wanted to distribute seeds to gardeners. We got a small community gardening grant to do this. And we wanted to focus on open pollinated seeds, as well as, in addition, seeds that were either important historically or culturally to the Cape Breton community, and were adapted to our region, which, if you don't know Cape Breton, you know, Canada is challenging, Cape Breton is extra challenging in terms of growing. Well, then COVID hit, and there was this explosion of interest in gardening, as well as a concomitant lack of seed supply. You know, a lot of the supply chains that were supplying seeds to the major growers or major seed companies, you know, went kaput. And so our seed library, we decided to, you know, go forward with it anyway, even though the libraries were closed. We mailed out seeds. We had little pickup tables outside each library branch and everything like that. It was really quite heroic, you know, on the part of the librarians and me. And it was a huge success. And I had donated much of the seed being offered, and these were the most popular. And so popular that, well, my son, who was helping me at the time, accidentally gave away most of my seed stock of the seeds that were being offered. So that was a little personal crisis. He meant well. He was helping. So we got a grant to continue the seed library the following year. And we did have, I still had other seeds that I offered, so we did that. But in the winter of 2021, I didn't have the ability to do all the grow outs needed on my own farm for lots of, you know, largely COVID related, but other related reasons. So I approached the owners of the Big Spruce Brewery because they had a large garden that they were wondering what to do with. They, you know, they had been planting it, you know, sort of haphazardly for a few years. And I talked them into turning it into a demonstration garden and seed production garden. So, you know, they're good friends. So, you know, they were willing to go along with this. And we decided on a grow out of 4 different kinds of beans, and the 2 tomatoes that had been the most popular, and 1 squash. So the 1 bean that we decided on was this one here. This is Bay Verte. It's a semi-vining bean. It was originally grown by, we think, the Maliseet in northern New Brunswick and handed on to the Acadian community. So we wanted to grow that for use in the chili in their food truck portion of their operation. But as well, we wanted to redistribute it, as it were, to the First Nations in Cape Breton, largely Mi'kmaq. Now, the Mi'kmaq did not have much of a gardening tradition, but there have been a lot of community gardens, and these beans may well have been traded to them in pre-European contact times. We're not sure, but giving back to those local gardening projects in the Mi'kmaq communities in Wagmatcook and Wakaba, Eskasoni and Member 2, it felt like a small gesture of giving back, of reconciliation, if you will. So that really pleased us to be able to do that. So we did a very large grow out of those. Next slide. We also wanted to grow these 2 community seeds. Now, Cape Breton, as you may know, has had the first multicultural community in Canada, when people from around the world came to work in the coal mines and the steel mill here in Sydney. On the right is the Ionetti pole beans, which Bob just listed as being one of the endangered ones. Well, it's not endangered anymore because we grew it out at Big Spruce and it did really well. And we've been distributing it through the seed library ever since. And that was brought by the Ionetti family in 1906. They came from Brittany, Italy, and brought the seeds with them. And I was given a sample of their seeds. On the left is the Horochuk beans. They were brought in 1902 from the Ukraine by the Horochuk family. And again, we had people in the community that had been saving seed for, over 100 years that donated some seeds to get us started or get me started. And I've been growing it ever since. And now we're redistributing it back to the community. We also decided on the next bean. There we go, Black Valentine. And this addressed the adaptability part of our project. Black Valentine is a common enough bean in some of the smaller seed catalogs, but this particular selection I've been working on for a number of years to make it blight resistant, because we have a lot of problems with anthracnose and different leaf blights in our maritime climate. It's very wet and rainy at the sort of seed saving end of the year for beans. So we needed a variety that was resistant to that. And Black Valentine, and I was able to work on that with the help of the Morden Agricultural Station bean experts, particularly Dr. Anfu Hu. So I want to thank him for him being very patient and kind with all my sort of dumb sounding questions when I went to visit him. We also grew, I don't have tomato seeds to show because they all look just like tomato seeds, but we also, oh yeah, well, that was next year. we also grew Sprint tomatoes and Rito cherry tomatoes. The Rito cherry I was given by the seed bank, or I think through Seeds of Diversity, and Sprint tomatoes were a discontinued variety. It's been discontinued for about 30 years now from Johnny Selected Seeds. And these are, again, really well cold adapted. And that's so important in Cape Breton, where a lot of the standard varieties of tomatoes don't set flowers or fruit or drop their fruit if the weather goes below 10 degrees. And we often have a long frost free here because of the maritime climate, but it is very much cooler than what you can really grow a beefsteak easily in. So that's partly why the seeds were so popular with the seed library at the library in Sydney and around Cape Breton, is because I had proven these seeds to be able to do well in Cape Breton, right? As Bob was saying, big seed companies, they're not growing seeds for my bioregion, even Halifax Seed Company and Bessie's and others of the Maritimes, they're not adapted to the challenges that we have in Cape Breton. They're not very well. So we also grew Musqué de Provence because we wanted a squash. That's a sea moschata, and moschata is really helpful. Like everyone knows it, the most common moschata people know would be butternut squash, but there's so many other moschatas that are really interesting and tasty. So we grew the Musqué de Provence, which really did very well. We were going to use it we did use it in the food truck And plus it's just really fun to grow. It just goes rampant, and has these huge squashes. So and in this case, you know, for the tomatoes and the squash, I provided not only the seed, but I started the transplants for them as well. You know, like their full-time landscape gardener looked after weeding and cultivating and doing all kinds of stuff like that, that I'm finding as I age is a lot harder for me. And all I had to do was sort of point at things and say, you need to thin these out, or you know, you need to take the weeds out of here, and it would be done the next time I went. So that was a really useful partnership. So season 2 was also a success at the seed library, but this time we had plenty of seeds for the Horichuk and the Ionetti and the Sprint and the Rito cherry to be distributed. And they were very popular. And we've got enough for a couple of years, so we don't have to grow them out for another year. But Jeremy White, the owner of Big Spruce Brewery, and his wife, Melanie, who's also the owner, obviously, they were really interested in continuing this seed project. And they wanted a Three Sisters garden this year. So they grew corn. I forget what variety of corn because they chose it, and I don't remember it, which one they chose. Anyway, and we grew squashes, and we grew these were the Roja de Seda, also from the Seeds of Diversity Gene Bank. They're a semi-vining bean. They're from Chile. They did really well until the raccoons got into the corn, you know, and knocked the corn to the ground. But the beans still produced. You know, they're kind of a mess to kind of untangle and shell and everything like that. But we've got plenty to make that a secure variety as well now. So there was less pressure. But Jeremy wanted, but we wanted to, yeah, I know you're still seeing red beans. It's because I didn't have enough slides to go in. The next slides. Okay, can we get another slide? Now, this is another bean that we grew this year, which is Mrokumier. It's originally from Kenya in Africa. I got that again from Bob, actually, I think directly from Bob at Seeds of Diversity. And when I was showing Jeremy, the owner of Big Spruce Brewery, you know, all the possible things that we could grow out, and I have about 20 different variety of beans that I maintain. He said, oh, I want to grow the purple ones. You know, and he's 6'6" and he owns the brewery. So I said, of course, we'll grow the purple ones. But another interesting little story about the Mrokumier beans is I was giving a talk on seed saving at the Fortress of Louisbourg a number of summers ago. And a couple came up and were looking at my collection of beans and my bean bowl and everything like that, and said, oh, those are beans from home. And I said, I don't think so. They're from Kenya. And they said, well, we're from Ghana. So of course, so we had a good laugh over that. And I sent some beans back with them. So that's another way that the community can spread back to people and be maintained all around the world and not just to your local area. Now we're going to continue of these grow outs. You know, it was so successful. And we're thinking of making it even more of an educational garden. Yep, the bean bowl, there's my bean bowl. It just looks beautiful, doesn't it? It's if you ever saw the movie Emily, you see her running her fingers through the lentils in the market. Well, everybody likes to run their fingers through my bean bowl. But next year, we want to have little plaques in the garden with information about each variety. Spring is always so busy that I don't know if we'll get to it or not. But they are totally on board with this. And I'm really excited to be able to hand off some of my seed growing responsibilities to, you know, to someone who's got younger knees and shoulders than I have. And Bob was talking about, you know, the grains, how you, or the seeds that you get from the seed bank, and you only get a small amount. Well, I grew young oats, which are a hull-less variety of oats from China. And they've solved the problem that a lot of hull-less oats have, which is the sort of hairs in the middle of the seed, you know, which are very unpalatable. And I got one of those small envelopes, and I bumped it up, you know, over 3 or 4 years to about a 1/4 acre of production. but I'm not able to do that anymore. But I've handed it to a young couple who live near me, who were looking for a hull of oats to feed their livestock. And now they're maintaining the variety. You know, if you can't do it all yourself, as time or age or space allows, you know, it's, you know, when you're a seed saver, you feel responsible for them. Oh, good. No, 1 minute. Okay. You feel responsible for them. They're like your children. So it's really pleasing to me to be able to hand some of the responsibility over to others. At the Seed Library with the Cape Breton Regional Library, we don't accept seed back. That's not the purpose of that. It's more distribution and education. But, you know, thanks to Big Spruce, you know, we have a really good preservation tool there, one that's likely to continue for many years. Okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Michelle, for sharing and for sharing these beautiful photos of beans. It was, you've got some claps happening here in the audience. Yeah, it was really interesting to hear even some of the varieties that were on the slides that Bob was sharing and how you are stewarding them in collaboration with those in your community. So I'm going to stop sharing here and hand it over to Angela. Angela MacDougall has been running Fundy Farms Community Harvest with her husband Ryan since 2014. They farm on owned and rented land in rural southern New Brunswick, right on the Bay of Fundy, and produce veggies and herbs and small fruits and maple and birch syrup using organic, permaculture, and no-till methods. She has also participated, if I understand correctly, in the Atlantic Seed Bank Growouts and the Bauta Seed Mentorship Program. And because I like following you on social media, I really notice these incorporations of unique varieties into the collaborations that you do with local businesses. So I'll pass that over to you, Angela.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm just gonna try to give like a quick breakdown of what is going on in my life on the farm, because we just seem to have a lot going on. So I'm going to try to go through it quickly and kind of stick to my points. So there we go. So just kind of quickly why we started growing seeds in the first place. We had a neighbor up the road who has a small seed company, Maple Farms, and so I kind of, when I moved to the area and got into farming, quickly met her, and she just kind of started introducing me to seed saving. So part of it was a bit of a curiosity about what seeds we could save and which ones were easier and harder to save for our cold climate and short season. And then once we started getting into that, we also realized how important it was to keep a lot of the old varieties going so that they don't phase out, which some of the presenters already talked about. And then the next reason largely became accessibility, like Bob was talking about, where we're a really small market garden and we wanted to be able to make a living from the farm year round so that we didn't have to get off-farm jobs. So we came up with the idea that we would barter some of the maple syrup that we make for field space because we don't have a lot of flat growing area on our property. So we started kind of with the idea of like, what can we grow or what can we sell in off season when we don't have a lot of fresh veggies. So we started growing these dry beans, and then the idea was to make like a mix, a soup bean mix that we could sell like at farmers markets or other like local shops, like our local bakery where they sell other local goods. And then we quickly ran into an issue that we couldn't find large enough seed packets to grow like big sections of beans. or like bulk sizes. So we ended up just starting really small, and then each year we would save a bigger amount of each variety. So now we're up to, I don't know, 10 or 15 varieties. And we probably save about a pound of each. I mean, if the crop does well. Okay. So I'm gonna kind of answer 4 questions here to kind of keep me on track. So kind of big question is, how do we make space for all of this on our farm? So the first one is crop planting. In January, I really like to kind of curl up with a cup of tea for a few days and sit on the couch and just plan all of our little garden plots and what's going to go there. Oops. In our main garden area that you can see here, we rotate through 4 different crops: cucurbits, brassicas, carrots and beets, and then alliums. And then once those crops are harvested to sell, we stick in short dates maturity crops like radish or like hackberry turnips. And I always like to refer to Elliot Coleman, where he talks about the hidden garden or hidden space on your farm. So kind of the areas that you maybe thought you couldn't grow anything, or you didn't really look over there and you didn't notice. So a couple of years ago, we turned our like our little side yard of our house, I guess, on our lawn into a new garden that is in the shade of the peak when the sun goes over of the sun. But it actually turned out great because we can grow stuff there like cilantro and spinach and green onions, I guess, too. The other thing is we don't grow out all the same crops every year. So lots of the seeds are good for a few years. So we can kind of pick and choose in a rotation what we're going to do each year, and then take a break from one to give us variety and for our lack of space. Okay. So drying and processing is a really big one. This is one of the most important. You really need to plan ahead for this. Like you can grow like an acre of dry beans, but what are you going to do with them when you harvest them? And you need to put them somewhere and wait for them to be processed. Also, we kind of ran into the issues this year of doing different tomato crops, and like where are you gonna sit your buckets of like stinky fermenting tomato seeds that aren't going to be in the way or aren't attracting flies or mice or whatever. So you just have to think ahead about those kinds of things and have a plan. We were lucky that with our property we acquired this little shed. So we kind of use that as a dual purpose. For in the winter, we're using it as a grow room. So we start all of our transplants in there, and then we convert it over to a drying space for the fall once we're harvesting our onions and our garlic. And we do lots of herbs. So we have mesh hanging racks, lots of fans going in there, and it works out really good for us. So we try to grow things that we can use for multi-purpose. So not just for seeds, but what are we going to do with them after? Something else where we also have to plan ahead for. So like, who can I sell this to? If it's something a little bit odd, like habaneros that we grew this year, like what am I going to do with all those habaneros? I'm not going to be able to sell them all at the farmer's market, but I might be able to sell them to a friend who also has a farm stand, or people who make value-added products. So I kind of already mentioned this a little bit, but it's also important not to grow all the same things in the same place each year. So even in New Brunswick, where we get really cold winters, we still see disease and pests that don't die off through the winter. Okay, so the next question I'm going to answer is, what does growing conservation varieties give to our farm? So we've kind of become known as the people who grow weird things, like was mentioned in the introduction. The locals in our very rural area are not really used to seeing different colored tomatoes and carrots and things like that. But the restaurants that we've been able to work with, they love it. And so they know that when they're looking for something special, they can come and find me. So now the big question is, how do we market all the stuff that we harvest from our conservation varieties? Oops. So one is education. This is like doing events. We've started doing these forest feasts where we serve the food to the people, you know, and a couple weeks later they come back to the market and they're like, you know, what's that squash that we ate? It was so great. We do a lot of social media. We do the January Pantry Challenge where we're always like posting recipes from the food that we've been eating. We do like kind of little posters that we'll bring to the farmer's market or at the farm stand where it shows a picture of the vegetable and like how to store it and how to eat it. And then we have our beans. So we do 4 bean packages or 4 different bean mixes that we sell at our farm stand and at the market and to other local shops. And
I think we lost her for a second there. I think what happened is sometimes rural internet cuts out and we've lost her. So perhaps we'll invite her back after Angie, just if there's a few further comments from Angela, but perhaps I'll introduce Angie Koch and you can take over from here. Angie, as some of you know, is the seed library coordinator for Seeds of Diversity and also manages the seed library grow outs. But she also is an amazing farmer of a diversified vegetable operation in Waterloo called Fertile Ground. And her farm is home to some of Seeds of Diversity's seed saving work, as well as the showcase and trial gardens for EFAO and the About It initiative. So Angie, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk about how you're incorporating seed conservation into your farm.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. So I think I want to talk from both of those perspectives a little bit over the next few minutes. I'll get to some of Seeds of Diversity's programs and ways that any of you could participate in doing some grow outs at your farm in very, very manageable ways. At the end of what I'm talking about, I'm going to start just a little bit talking about ways that we are able to participate in seed conservation at our farm and some of the challenges that we've had trying to do as much of that work as I would like to do, a few ways we've tried to work around those restrictions. So that's what I'm going to focus on for the first little bit. So we're a diversified market garden. We grow primarily for CSA. We have a 350 member CSA and we have about 4 to 5 acres in vegetable production each season. And we're a classic CSA in the sense that we grow about 30 different crops. And so there's a lot of different families of vegetables and a lot of different varieties of vegetables and a lot of chance for cross-pollination and a lot of moving parts and complication. And so working seed saving, rotations and isolation distances and population sizes into the complexity of that CSA has been really hard for me to wrap my head around. And so saving seed for our own market garden use is not something that we have done a whole lot of, short of a couple of varieties that I'll talk about in a moment. So we've looked for other ways to try to incorporate seed biodiversity conservation at our farm. And one of them is partnering with Seeds of Diversity to host seed saving beds here. And what we've found, which is a little different than what Angela was just talking about, is that trying to incorporate our seed saving varieties right into our main crop production is too challenging. We can't get the space for isolation. If we try to just pop something a few beds over and get distance, we sort of lose track of it because we know we're not harvesting it for money right now. And sadly, this is how the world works, and economics end up driving decisions in the crunch of the season more than I wish they did. Oh, capitalism. So what we've found is that creating mixed beds that have things like lettuce, tomatoes, beans, and then more lettuce and more tomatoes and some peas and some beans, and mostly crops that have small enough isolation distances that the sort of 2 to 4 acres of space we can create around them is sufficient. So our farm is not a place where saving seed from most types of squashes, say, or a lot of insect pollinated like peppers is really possible. So that's just a limitation. But there's lots of things that have smaller isolation distances. And those mixed beds become islands that we can stick either into areas that are mostly cover cropped, and we'll just put an edge along the bed where we can get some irrigation to it, or we'll in the middle of our zucchini block or cucurbit block, because we know we're not saving cucurbit seeds anyway, we'll stick a mixed bed down the middle of there because our bean and tomato and other blocks are farther away. And that's been an approach that has worked fairly well for us. What also works great is that Bob comes out and does most of the management on those beds. So we've been able to provide the space and the irrigation and the bed prep work. And then Bob comes out and does the actual planting and observations and harvest. So we don't have to make time for all of that. So it's been a partnership that has worked really well for us. And while not everyone lives in the same region as the headquarters of Seeds of Diversity, probably many people have partners in their customer base or neighboring farms or local gardeners who might be willing to take a project like that on. And it's amazing how much seed can be produced in 3 200-foot beds, especially when what we're trying to do is grow for the seed library. We don't need giant amounts of any one thing. So that has been one of the ways that we've looked for partnerships, and we can provide space and resources, but not do all of the work on that. We'll mix a few things into those beds that we also are invested in. And one of them, Michelle was talking about Rideau cherry tomato, which indeed is one that I sent you, Michelle, maybe 10 years ago, when we were trying to sort out some cherry tomato mysteries in the seed library and what was what. And you sent it back to me and you said, it is so great, it's crack resistant, it's sweet, it's a fabulous variety. And so I grew a few at my farm. So I stole from the seed library, I'm sorry. And what I found, and so this is one of the things that I have found helpful, is planting a few of those in my tomato tunnel, based on that suggestion from Michelle, sort of a long shot, because most heirloom varieties don't do very well in covered growing systems for tomatoes. I stuck a few into one row where I tried a bunch of different things, and they have become one of our main red cherry tomatoes in our tunnel, totally unexpectedly. And so now they've turned into one of our main production varieties and actually do better than some of the hybrids that were developed specifically for tunnel production. So that is not often the story, but it is sometimes the story. One of the things that we did this year here as well is we hosted some demonstration gardens. And so that was sort of a unique opportunity to grow a whole bunch of different OP varieties that had been developed by breeders in mostly Ontario and Quebec, but a few other places that would have some similar climate to our area, to be able to show off the work that seed breeders are doing in developing OP varieties that fit niches that may have good market demand or good climate resilience. And so being able to walk through those gardens and see some of those varieties and pick out things that might work well in our garden, collect the seeds from those and then send some to the seed library and be able to keep some from our own production has been a really neat opportunity. One little story from that is that there was a giant squash called Lofthouse Machata, not a particularly visually consistent variety, and they weighed in at a minimum of 6 pounds and up to 15. And I hardly looked at them because my CSA does not want, no household wants a 15-pound squash. I'm always looking for nice little compact squashes that we can transport 350 at a time without filling an entire U-Haul. But a chef was looking, that we have a relationship with, who's interested in trying interesting varieties, was really interested in checking them out. And so we sent him a few of these squashes with a caveat that we don't really know a whole lot about them, but give it a try, let me know what you think. And he loved them and said they had this great moisture content and sweetness, and he really loved working with them. And he's been buying like 30 pounds of squash every couple of weeks, which is like 4 squash, but really easy to, so basically what I found unexpectedly is that by having this variety that I wouldn't have seen value in ahead of time, conserved here at the farm and grown out, I've found a new market and made a chef really happy. And we cooked it up at Rebecca's last night for dinner, and it was truly delicious. So yeah, I will continue growing some of these, even if they don't match the CSA model. So that, yeah, these are some of the surprises that have come about, or things that have happened as a result in even just growing out a few things here and there. And I loved what Angela was saying about it all starts with curiosity. And that's what I've found, is that the curiosity can lead to discoveries. One of the few beans that we do grow out for our own use at the farm is called, well, it's called the Schneider pole bean. I don't know what it's actually called. My landlady, lovely woman who came to Canada when she was a child, and has been living on the same road as me her whole life, has been growing these beans, had been growing these beans for about 20 years already. And she gave me some and said, they're just the best beans. If you're starting a garden on this land, you have to grow these beans. And I said, okay, thanks for the land. I'm going to grow some beans. And I've never grown pole beans before. And I don't know that without this instigation and this sort of feeling responsible to save these seeds, I would have continued growing pole beans, because they don't fit super well into our production, putting up trellising, taking down trellising. The bush beans are just easier to deal with for us, especially as the operation has grown. But I continue to grow these beans because what happened is I brought them to the CSA, and they were kind of big. Pole beans are a fair bit bigger than bush beans. Customers weren't used to seeing them. And I said, but you have to try them. They're the most delicious, juicy beans. You can feed them to your kids raw. They will love them. And they did. And now my CSA members have fallen in love with these beans. And it's become one of the things that makes the CSA valuable to them, is that they can get these beans that they can't find at the market. And then we also save some rattlesnake pole beans, which are beautiful and have purple mottling, and kids also love those. And so they're ones, and beans are so easy. You can have 2 varieties on the same trellis, and as long as you just keep a little section for seed saving at either end, it's actually really easy to work that right into the seed production. So those are a few ways that we have been able to work it in, and some of the value that it's had for us beyond just conserving seed, the storytelling value, the opportunity to communicate to members the importance of regional adaptation and growing things out that can't be found easily at supermarkets and grocery stores. We can't build an entire business model that way, but we can raise the value of our entire CSA basket just by including a couple of things like this a couple of times throughout the season. The whole experience is far more meaningful for people, and they can still get 95% of what they recognize and are familiar with. And so they don't feel stretched and weirded out. They just get these little interesting moments and experiences and offerings so as a way of including some sort of interesting, possibly out of the box things, that's worked really well for us. I think one of the things that I think is really valuable for us to remember as growers is that saving seeds is only one of the ways that we can meaningfully participate in seed biodiversity conservation and protection. Simply growing out a variety, even without the capacity to save the seeds, has a huge impact. And so looking for seeds in a seed catalog from a regional seed company and purchasing seed to include in a set of varieties that you're growing, and including some of those varieties that you're not going to save, but you're putting money into the seed system that isn't just supporting all of the, giant familiar hybrid varieties that may continue to be a staple of your production, is still a way of infusing money into a system that allows those growers to continue producing those seeds, improving those seeds, and managing those collections. So sometimes they're not available in the size of package that's really useful. So we've tried to find other ways to include them. So sometimes with varieties that we're growing from transplant, we will, where a smaller amount of seed is still valuable, we'll throw in some OPs to trial them alongside our tried and true hybrids that we grow. And sometimes they don't work out great, but often we will find something that works really well. And another thing that we've been able to do is grow those varieties out for a seedling sale so that other people can grow them in their gardens. And then we, having 250 seeds to grow 250 seedlings for sale is high margins for us. It's valuable. It gets the seeds out in the community. It makes other people aware of and experience growing these interesting varieties, but you can just buy a couple of packets and it's economical as well. So that's a few ideas. I'm going to just quick pop up a few slides here to talk about a couple things at Seeds of Diversity for a moment before we get to the questions, because I think it's probably almost question time. Come on, share screen. There we go. Sorry, I'm very slow over here. Okay, that should blow up in a moment for the rest of you. So this is just a quick picture of the trial gardens that were here this year. And so the idea here is you can see how many things fit in a small space. And, we've sort of measured out 30 feet between this planting and 40 feet between that one and 10 feet between that one to be able to do some seed saving as well as these demonstrations. So Seeds of Diversity, Bob talked a little bit about the seed library already, and what I wanted to talk through are some ways that people can become involved in growouts. So we had 3 community growouts at Seeds of Diversity last year. One we called the Save One Variety Challenge or Save One Rare Variety Challenge. And this encouraged people to who are members of Seeds of Diversity to look in the seed exchange, pick one variety carried by only one grower across the country, request it, grow it out, and put it back into the seed library, which doubles the amount of seed that's available in that variety. So that was one of the projects, and we will continue doing this one every year. We did another one called Save an Old Seed. We had all these beans and tomatoes that have been in the library for a really long time, and we just can't keep on top of growing them out. So we sent them out to people and said, do your best. We can't germ test them. We only have a tiny little bit. Grow them and send them back. And that's been a fabulous way and tell us about them, because sometimes we have varieties in the library that we don't know. And beans and tomatoes are so easy for anyone to grow. Just doing one of each is a fabulous way to be involved. And then we had a more complicated, slightly more complicated project. We've been working on breeding a ground cherry that's more erect so that it's easier to harvest and not kind of sprawling horizontal across the ground. And we're just through our second season of this participatory ground cherry breeding project, where people do selections, send the seed back, we pool it, and then improvements happen from year to year, and we continue sending the seed out. So those have been our community grow outs. And then we're always looking for growers who will grow out varieties that are in the seed library that I identify each year as being our highest priorities for seed saving. And some of the things that we have the most trouble with finding growers for are grains. We have a lot of backyard seed savers who are keen but struggle with isolation distance for anything other than sulfurs, who don't know how to grow grain, who are scared of growing grain, but you actually don't need to grow all that much grain, and they're pretty simple. So someone who has a property with a little bit more space could be so valuable to us to grow out grains for the library. And biennials is another really tricky thing for us. They take higher population sizes and require storage over winter. And this is something that it's really hard to find growers able to offer. So those are two of the really tricky things for us. Brassicas are always also tricky because of the isolation distance and the population size. So those are a few of the ways that if you were interested in participating in doing a couple of grow outs and introducing some new varieties in your operations, that we could do that. And I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to throw into the chat for anyone who is interested, growers, in participating in any of those grow outs or finding out more. The email is in the chat, growers@seeds.ca, and we can connect you with some of those programs.
Thank you.
I think
so
I'll
much.
leave it at that, so we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Angie. I wanted to invite Angela back if you wanted to have a few further comments, and then when you're done, perhaps we'll get Michelle and Bob to join Angie, and we can all chat together.
Sure. 1 second here. There. Can you see that?
We can, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Sorry, I'm at Foley Mountain in the middle of nowhere. So I'll just quickly just kind of go over, I just had like my 5 key varieties for this year. So first of all is the Steve's Case Knife bean. This is a bean that I discovered from Janet Wallace from MacDougall Seeds. It's a bean that the Steve's family brought to Albert County when they came here, and it was kind of hard to find it. So I found a lady who is still growing it out. So I got a few seeds from her, and now we grow out a row in our greenhouse, kind of similar to what Angie was saying. All the beans that we do outside is all bush beans because it's a lot of work to put up all the trellising, but we kind of multi-use this one here. So it works out really good for us. And then we can keep this variety going. We sell it at the farmer's market and at CD Saturday, and people are really excited to see it there. The next one is, this is the Gilla Cliff Dweller squash that I actually learned about from doing a grow out for the regional seed bank. And it just had a really cool story, and I love growing weird things and squash. So it turned out really good. This one was found, I guess, in the dwellings of the cliff dwellers in New Mexico. And it's kind of a weird squash because the inside isn't like a dark orange. It's very light, almost like a summer squash, and it doesn't have a whole lot of flavor. But it was really fun, and it's huge, and it dries really well, and it stores really long. And again, same as what Angie was saying about finding a chef to use it up. So we found a restaurant to work with, and he started putting it on the menu as a soup feature. This one is Pusacita black carrot, which I forget where I got this seed from originally, but it was like really weird. It's really a knobby, hairy carrot. It's not very attractive, kind of like ugly looking, but again, we store it through the winter. It's kind of fun to cook with. It's kind of like a beet. The black kind of dye from it colors your hands and everything you're working with. But the chefs love to cook with it because it's something really different, and it's fun to bring it to the market and show people and get them to try it. The black turtle bean, which is fairly common, not super exciting, but it's really become a staple for us, especially because it's a short days to maturity. It's a great producer. It grows in any soil. We put it in all of our bean mixes. We grow up for ourselves for winter. And yeah, we've just come to really love this one. And the last one is Malabar spinach. So we discovered this spinach 2 years ago. Started saving the seeds from it. I think I got like 5 seeds in a package. And it grows kind of opposite of regular spinach. It grows obviously on a vine, but it loves the heat. So in the summer, when we're having a hard time offering greens at the market, we can have this one. It's still going right now, so I'm not sure when it's going to die off for frost, but we've had some cold nights, so we'll see how long it goes. But you can kind of see all the little flowers on there. They make these kind of pea-sized seeds, so they're really easy to harvest. So anyway, this is kind of our new favorite. And that's it.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you were able to pop back on. I'd love to invite all the panelists to come together. I think Tiara is going to make it so that we're all pinned on the screen. We have a few questions that have come in through the chat, but perhaps I'll start with one for Angie. Angie, Patrick's asking, when looking at collaborations or sharing space, how are you maintaining your expectations, needs on the land you have to care for? Are there agreements in place, or do you have regular conversations? How do you triage potential collaborations? This actually could be for lots of folks, but I think it came in while you were speaking, Angie.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of an exceptional situation with Seeds of Diversity, since I work for Seeds of Diversity as well as having the farm. It's a fairly internal type of partnership. So it's that hasn't required quite the same level of care in outlining participation agreements. It does, but it can happen in-house because Bob and I work for the same organization and see each other regularly in the same office. So I'm not sure that I have the most wisdom. I would say in other experience, when I've had other growers who use space here for projects that I am maybe only tangentially involved with, or where there's some sort of participation, we always put things in writing and sign off on it and decide whether there's any monetary exchange that's taking place, and work out some of the areas on paper that where there might be overlap. Like, are there expectations that I'm providing tilled land that I'll just stay off the land, whether I'm providing irrigation supply or not, and it's sort of trying to anticipate some of the places where there might be hiccups or bottlenecks or tension later on, and just getting that in writing. And some of those arrangements have involved someone paying rent, others have just been exchanges of other natures, but we have been careful to delineate that. I hope that kind of gets at it.
There's been times when I've wanted to do a particular squash grow out, and I have given the transplants of that species to my neighboring gardeners to ensure that there's no cross pollination. And Angela, I was very pleased to see you growing the Gila cliff dweller. That seed came from me.
Another one of Michelle's epic grow outs.
I called them Butch. They were so huge.
There's a question from Jocelyn, and perhaps you've already talked about this, Angie, but wondering about ways that you're reaching out to organic farmers who are happy to help, other than contacting you at the email that you put in the chat. Are there other avenues that you're reaching out to farmers?
I mean, we do what we can. We put things in our newsletter, on social media. We partner with the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario to have information go out in their newsletters. And we have information on our website, but it is hard to reach farm scale growers, and we would love more of those connections. We used to have a vegetable seed producers network that we coordinated, and that was a way that we worked more directly with farmers, but that program petered out a number of years ago. I would say many of our farm connections came through that program. So probably the best way is to reach out to us at growers@seeds.ca, and I will do my best to connect you with the type of grow out that would work for your situation and match your interests and our needs as best we can.
Yeah, thank you. I invite folks to continue asking questions in the chat. There was one that came in registration that I thought was very interesting, asking for those of you involved in some of this on-farm seed conservation, what are some of the sort of more systemic changes that are needed to make it easier for farmers to do some of the seed conservation on their farms? I don't know, Angela, what do you think of some of the sort of bigger changes, maybe folks not directly involved in farming, because we had quite a number of folks who checked off other in our registration form. Maybe there's other ways that people can help farmers do this work.
So I have a few things that I get other people to grow for me. For some of our herbal teas and stuff, we're so small that we don't have enough space to do everything we want to do. So I've kind of not just friendly contracted out some growing of certain things like Tulsi, which is something that I can't find in like large bulk seeds. So, you know, we can take 3 or 4 cuts off of it, but then still get the seed crop and then use it again for the next year, and maybe hand out some of the extra seed to the at Seedy Saturday. But I think one of the big things for us is just having this routine every year. And you know, you're only growing like 1 year, I think last year even, like we didn't really do any squash crops because we had other things kind of in our rotation that we wanted to be able to collect seed from, and it didn't fit. So yeah, just kind of having a routine and sticking to it.
That's super helpful. I don't know if, Michelle, you've thought of some of the work that might need to happen beyond your farm or your collaboration with the brewery in terms of supporting farmers to do on-farm conservation, if you had any comments there.
Well, especially when I was doing the extension work for Bauta, a lot of it was giving people seed, you know, like a lot of my seed stock gets given to market gardeners and growers who then maybe, as Angie was, enticed to, you know, incorporate it into their regular farm grow outs and stuff like that. You know, that's really important, is outreach like that, you know. And there's a group of Mennonite farmers in Sault Ste. Marie that I still correspond with and send seed, you know, that it's all about getting the seeds out there into the hands of farmers, particularly ones in challenging growing season. I mean, I am all admiration for everything Angie accomplishes, but man, you know, irrigation isn't a problem for us. You know, it's hurricanes and it's floods and it's wind and it's early frosts and things like that. And yet these marginal growing regions are the ones that might harbor, you know, varieties that will perform, maybe not to the standards of a hybrid or anything like that, but at least they'll produce in our regions. And if you can give growers examples of that, they will use them, they will incorporate them.
Great words of wisdom. I'm gonna, Bob, maybe you had a comment in the chat, but for those who are listening to the recording or are not able to see the chat, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you had mentioned here about ways of finding what needs to be grown out.
Yeah, there's a question on how to find one of those varieties that is around but difficult to find, and that we need somebody to grow more of those and distribute those seeds. How do you find those? I like to make this as you know, transparent and as accessible a process as possible. You get to do it the same way that I do it, which is we have this list of all the Canadian slug varieties and a seed exchange, and it isn't entirely comprehensive of what everybody is growing, but it's a pretty good snapshot. So if you look at those resources, this is just our seed exchange on seeds.ca and the seed finder, and find a variety that's only available from one source. That's a pretty good indication that that's one that could disappear if nobody's growing it. If that one source drops it, no one can get those seeds anymore. So buy those seeds or get those seeds and save more. And if everybody just did that, we would all be doing conservation.
That's amazing. I participated in the Rare Variety Challenge this year, and it was a lot of fun to go through that membership directory and find a variety that was exciting and had the stories that Angie was talking about, and Michelle and Angela, but also was only grown by one person. In terms of growing out for the seed library, which is definitely so important because seeds need to be adapted to our changing climate. Peggy had a wonderful question for Angie, and I know you did answer it in the chat, but just talking about the ability for a grower to perhaps ask for a particular crop or a particular variety that would fit into their system. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Angie?
Yeah, so we have a lot of growers and a lot of varieties that need growing out every year. And so we don't really have the capacity to have one-on-one conversations and sort of meet wish lists of everybody who wants. Often we'll get growers to give us parameters like, I can do determinate tomatoes. And then we ask you to be okay with whatever determinate tomato I prioritize and send you. That said, if you are a grower who's an experienced seed saver, and maybe you have the ability to grow some varieties that are in the categories that I've said are harder for us, cucurbits, brassicas, biennials, grains, and if you can contact me before Christmas, then there's a little bit of time to do a bit of back and forth and find out more specifically what you're interested in, and whether we have varieties that would match it. By the time we get to January, I'm on a bit of a timeline to make all of those matches, and there's not a lot of lag time to be doing the back and forth because someone else is waiting to get their seed while I wait to hear what this person wants, and it gets a little bit tricky. So the sooner in the fall you can be in touch, And sort of the more experience you have in your ability to meet some of our difficult crops, the more of that one-on-one negotiating we can do.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was my pleasure to grow out a rare wheat for you this season, and that was a wonderful experience, and just brought to mind how, you know, for the library, you don't send me a lot of seed, but also I don't need to, you know, send a huge amount, grow a lot of space worth of wheat for that, but to yet feel important and like I'm supporting the seed bank was really wonderful. There was a question, but I don't know exactly who it's for. It was from Annette asking, what does the light blue corn taste like? Annette, if it was for a particular person, let me know. Who was talking about a light blue corn?
That was Angie.
I think it was Angela.
I had it in a picture at the beginning.
Ah, yes.
Okay, that's actually a popcorn.
Oh, what is it called?
That was from a few years ago. I think it might have been Hoppy Blue, but I could be wrong.
Very cool. There's thanks happening here. Well, I'm noticing that we are at our time. I don't know if there's any further questions for folks. If there are, please do throw them in the chat. I'm just going to pull up the last few slides. Do this. My internet is also very slow today. So really, thank you so much to Angie, Angela, Michelle, Bob, and all of you for participating. You know, farmers are continuously asking for information like this, and so it's really been a delight to have this conversation. And I feel like I learned a lot, and I'm glad it was recorded so I can go back and pick up any things I might have missed and rewatch. And I said, thank you, dear participants, for being here and asking questions. We value your insights and ideas and feedback. So I believe Tiara is going to put up a short little poll that we'd love to capture just some instant data right now. It won't be shared with anyone other than our About Us staff. And while you're filling that out, I just want to also say that you can find out more about the work that we're doing, the work of Seeds and Diversity, catch up on past webinars you may have missed, some of my favorites, such as Can I Save It? Talking about intellectual property rights and vegetable varieties. And also there's a really wonderful one on seed cleaning equipment, which made me think about some of the challenges Angela was talking about when growing and conserving rare varieties of beans on her farm. Anyways, those past webinars are up on the Seed Change YouTube channel. All of this information and the links that have been thrown in the chat will be shared with participants afterwards. But with that, I'd love to thank you again and really just echo all of the wonderful comments in the chat. It really was an inspiring time that we've spent together. And with that, I'll close the webinar. So thank you so much, everyone.